Hello, everyone. So, storytelling in a game, there's a whole bunch of things that you need to know about why storytelling works in games, about why storytelling is important in games. What's very, very difficult for designers to think about, particularly when you're talking about free-to-play games, is how important it is to get the model right so that we use narrative, we use ongoing storytelling in such a way that we can actually help players stay inside a game. And there are some hugely important techniques about getting this just right. On this slide, there are two things I'm going to try and talk about. It's the same message, but it's basically this idea of the first line, the very opening moment in a game. And we forget about how important the opening moment is to the player. It's their first exposure to what you're trying to tell them in terms of an experience. It's their first kind of way of understanding, the way that you can foreshadow how important the sort of experience is, what the sort of emotions, what the values of the game are all about. In this game called Thomas Was Alone from Mike Bithell, an amazing indie game, you get this phrase, Thomas was alone. He only had existed for a few seconds, but he felt somehow that was important. It's the very first thing you see. And that mirrors the sort of thing that we do when we're looking at novels, when we're looking at stories that we tell in the first place. And there's another quote. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clock struck 13. When you hear a phrase like that, the opening words of the book 1984 by George Orwell, you already know, just by those very simple words, that whole emotional feeling. The idea that it was bright, it was cold, it was April, so it's normal. But the clock struck 13, which is not what they would normally do. And yet for the person who's narrating to you, clock striking 13 was normal. So you're already given this emotional moment in just a few words. And when we're designing games, when we're creating particularly free-to-play games, if we don't get the audience to understand in just 6 seconds, we've lost them. Then we have to think about the sort of Bond opening. The Bond opening is the moment in particularly the sort of James Bond movies, that 10 minutes of an amazing roller coaster that shows us who the hero is, what he's about, what he can do, just how impressive this guy, can be. Without that opening moment, without that period of time where we can have a meaningful experience with that game or that story, we don't know just how important it is when he fails later. Because until you have those experiences, you don't have this context of just how important the experience is. So what's that got to do with the games? Because if we don't get people playing and feeling good about the experience, we don't get them sitting down. We don't get them actually taking time in our game. And as soon as we can get them taking time in a game, we can actually get them engaged with what they're doing, playing our game. And then there's I'm trying to remember what it says in Russian to what it says in English. You've got to also think about the call to adventure. Is this call to adventure? Somebody, just 2 seconds. I can do it on the. If I put up on the PC on my iPad as well, I can remember the English. So this is based on the Arabian Nights, and the whole idea of the Arabian Nights is this lady Scheherazade, who is trying to tell a story, and if she doesn't tell the story right, her husband is going to kill her. And every night, this husband, this sultan, he has had a habit of murdering his wives. And Scheherazade, who happens to be the daughter of the vizier, finds a way to get him to keep her alive. She finds a way to stop him murdering other girls. And the way she does it is she tells stories every night. And she leaves those stories with these little tiny messages. These little sort of tiny notes. And in this particular one, this is the first journey of Sinbad. She says, at the end of it, I designed, after my first voyage, to spend the rest of my days in Baghdad, but it was not long before I grew weary of a quiet life. This is the end of the first story of the journeys of Sinbad the Sailor. What are you doing in your games that has that sense of emotional quality at the end of every episode, every playing session, that makes the player think, I've got to come back. I have an anticipation of future value if I keep playing this game. I also happen to love Flash Gordon. There's a thing about the idea of the kind of 1940s, 30s American serial matinees that always got shown on television in the UK when I was growing up. And Flash Gordon was one of these ones that really got me. There's Flash Gordon, there was the Lone Ranger, there was Buck Rogers, and at the end of every episode there was always some disaster. Flash would fall over a cliff, or his girlfriend would fall over a cliff, or some other hero type character would fall over a cliff. It wasn't always just falling over cliffs. It might be they were surrounded by bad guys and had big guns that pointed at them. Like in this particular example, Borin, who was a bad guy, said, "You put a fellow to death, I'll slay him or die." Dozens of weapons then surround them, and Flash and Zarkov look around at the ring of death. Borin raises his hand and starts to fall. That whole idea of building tension. So what do we do in games? Well, we actually have the opportunity to build tension. And I'm not just talking about over one session. We can build tension over many, many sessions, just as they did in the 30s and 40s around the movies. Come back next time, next week, to see what happens. How does Flash survive? Are you thinking about that as you're designing games? Because what builds longevity means that you have to build the player's desire to come back time and time again. So the road of trials. If you may have noticed, and I think somebody there's a guy who's going to talk about this sort of idea of a story arc, the mythical arc of storytelling. It's called the hero's journey. So there's a guy talking about this on Friday as well. I like the hero's journey. It's a really good metaphor. Quite often, games writers forget to put it in context of the whole life cycle of the player. And that's the opportunity we have. And that's how we can keep retention. Road of Trials is, for me, about the ability to be able to keep players continuously playing. Being able to have trials and actions and activities that we continuously do. Now, in a TV series or in a movie, this whole road to trials thing will be done and over and dusted, and in a montage scene, in a kind of back to back. But as players of our game, we can actually get them to do all of those actions. We can keep them playing time and time again. We can also get to the stage where we can start looking at socialization. And I particularly like the idea of using Star Wars as a metaphor for socialization. The idea that it's a powerful ally, gives the Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. I don't care, it's a silly idea, but there is some quite fun things we can think about if we think that the whole idea of the social interaction with other players is an important thing to our playing. But beware the dark side. There is a temptation. Actually, this is a good thing from the point of view of game design. We need to tempt our players into wanting to do things with us. We need to tempt them into wanting to spend money. We have to keep them playing and engaging with us. If we don't do that, we lose them. We have to build that sensation. We have to make them feel like those heroes are about to go into an epic battle and survive. And there's always that moment in that preparation for that where we're going to have tension. We're going to be concerned about whether we'll survive or not. And then, of course, there's the epic battle. I mean, we know we're waiting for this. We're expecting this. This is the reason why we got ourselves ready. We're going to level up. We're going to be ready to go and bash the enemy. But of course, in most free-to-play games, we don't just have one epic battle. We're building ourselves constantly up to having a repeatable and enjoyable version of that. But you've got to still feel that moment. You've got to have the anticipation before it comes, the experience of having that moment, and then the experience, the expectation of having it again and again. All of this is storytelling. All of these behaviors that we create in games is storytelling. It's just that we have to tell stories differently than they do in the movies. In fact, it's much similar to what they do in a TV world. If you think about the TV series that you love, the ones that really grab your attention have both a start and finish that keeps the world relatively consistent, but also has a narrative arc across the series. What are we doing in a game? We have a repeatable mechanic. This is when you're successful. You have a repeatable mechanic. You have a story arc, a context loop I call it, and then you have a metagame, which is the discussion around the game. There's all the things that are not the game. Then we have the transition. Tribal Wars talks about this in terms of it's actually a quote I got from an alliance, a guild inside Tribal Wars itself. Tribal Wars, anyone heard of Tribal Wars, by the way? Okay, so it's a game from InnoGames that's been around for ages, a long, long time. I love it because it's one of those weird games that should never exist because it's got this real big gap in the middle of the play. But when you get passed through that process, you've built your villages, you start attacking people, they start attacking you, you get your village wiped out, you do it again. And you always end up with your village wiped out and starting again. And it's one of those weird things. Why do I keep doing this? And I keep doing this because there's something about the community which keeps me going, which has transformed my attitude to playing. So it's an amazing thing. And the final piece of the puzzle is the return. So I like to think about Columbo. Columbo, the TV series. This is a detective who's completely incompetent, or at least he seems to be. And he talks to all of the bad guys and all of the murderers, and it's only at the end that he works out exactly what happened. You've already seen the murder. The weird thing, a TV series and the detective, we've already seen the murder. But at the end, he says, just one more thing. And that's when you know. That's when you know he's worked it out. I'm going to tell you not just how, but why. The ability to be able to create a story that gets the player, or the reader, or the viewer to keep coming back, to keep wanting to know what that one more thing is, even though they know that pattern. That's what's going to be successful. And that's narrative, and that's storytelling. So I'm Oscar. I'm really sorry I was so late. I can't believe I overslept. But I work for a company called Amplifier. We do some fantastic tools for gameplay recording and sharing. We've got games like Secret Exit, which was the first game that we had live. It had 10,000 videos in the first month of launch. We've had games since, like Nimble Quest, that had 10,000 videos uploaded from the players, so players recording themselves playing. 10,000 in a week from Nimble Quest. For Bad Piggies, the game from Robio, they had 10,000 videos uploaded in the first day. Of those videos, something like half of them were shared on Facebook. These are stories that the players themselves have created out of their games. Not the designers, not the developers, but the players created their own stories and they shared them. And then their friends watched them. And in the case of Secret Exit, 15 of their friends watched it. In the case of Nimble Quest, 20 of their friends watched those videos. That's on average the number of views that we saw per Facebook share. Bad Piggies saw about 40 views per Facebook share. If you give the opportunity not only to use your storytelling techniques to keep your player, but you leave freedom for your player to share their experiences with their friends, it can be amazing. And bad people gets up to 20% downloading the game. We do game ads, but I've just been given my 0 minutes. Thank you very much for coming. I'd take questions, but I suspect I'll be thrown out. Thank you very much.
Один вопрос можно задать, если он есть. Или мы... О, один вопрос.
Thank you for your lecture. What do you think about intro movies or intro some maybe another or some types of intro in casual games?
It's very tempting for people to put an intro movie into a game. I can understand the temptation. We've seen it in classical games quite a lot. The trouble is, all it does, it stops your player playing. So if you put an intro movie in that takes more than a few seconds, you have just stopped your player experiencing your game. So I would strongly recommend not doing that. There are some games where it's very difficult not to. But there seems to be, I mean, I talk about 6 seconds to get you started playing. And I don't mean that lightly. If you think, particularly free to play, but I think generally as well, if we actually care about the players carrying on playing, we really need to know that we not just show them or tell them what's good about the game, they have to experience. I feel like Yoda when I say this. Do, don't tell. There's a sort of Yoda-like quality to that. So we need them to do. We don't want to tell them what to do. And that's why I prefer, personally, to not have a tutorial. Now, it's really hard. Now, Thomas Was Alone, that first game, on the first slide, Thomas Was Alone is amazing because it has that phrase, Thomas Was Alone. He only just existed for a few seconds, but he felt that was important. And then there's a little box on the bottom of that screen, and there's an incline up to an open box, and the box that is Thomas has a little arrow pointed at it. Situations like that, because of the angle of that line that where Thomas is sitting on, and the open box, you already know what to do. Why do we need a video?
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you for coming.